Sorry, there was a technical problem and I was interrupted, so I go back to more or less where I was and watch both videos. Okay, so there is, I don't know, the first video will be that I was making already, and before the interruption was about 7 8 minutes, and then I will wrap up. Now I was speaking about the question of the 14th amendment that you find on page 113, and then also 115, and then there is a section in the chapter called securing, right, securing basic freedoms, and there are three categories that you are given. And then the question of the amendment, the first amendment, the establishment clause, you will read that on page 116. All this very much also having to do with the question of a very important political question of religious freedoms. That's not a religious question, that's a political question, right? Whether people are or are not free to, and so on and so forth. Read that, okay? The establishment clause, and there is a reference again to Thomas Jefferson speaking, and that's on page 117, about the separation between church and state. You know, to what degree? Think about that. This is actually the case, or if there are problems around this issue as well. You know, there are interesting moments on page 118, maybe some kind of perhaps paradoxical moments in political cultural life, you know, and for example, I'm reading the national motto, right? In God we trust, which appears on our coins and paper money, is seen as more an acknowledgement that most citizens believe in God than any serious effort by government officials to promote religious belief and practice. Okay, that is true. However, you know, one may consider this, think about this in a critical way, right? What about those who don't, right, believe in God? And so this reasoning has also been used to permit, I'm reading again, the inclusion of the phrase, right, under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, right? A change that came about, that's an interesting historical note, you know, came about during the early years of the Cold War, right, as a means of contrasting the United States with the godless Soviet Union. Okay, so I mean, then of course we already see something you can think about, that the way in which very often then religion in general is ultimately used politically in an instrumental way, and that may be a problem. I leave that to you to think about, right? I mean, think about the way in which, you know, up to then all the way to situations of you know, wars of religion and so on and so forth. Okay, terrorist acts, right, where the attempt is to then justify them on religious grounds and so on and so forth, right? Very interesting, very problematic issues. Okay, so you can then the free exercise clause, read that as well. There is an interesting reference to a case involving the Jehovah's Witnesses. Other, you know, the question of the conscientious objectors about war, people, and so on and so forth. And then the important also issue of again, I had to be very schematic. Read freedom of expression. I mean, we speak so much about that freedom of expression, which also includes, of course, freedom of the press, and that is something that also includes the issue that will come back in a moment of Edward Snowden and other whistleblowers and so on and so forth. Okay, so That's the question of censorship you find on page 121, and also the question of on page 122 symbolic speech. What is the free expression that should be or should not be, right, protected, and so on and so forth. The symbolic speech you have on page 123, one of the most um, controversial is there is a picture as well, the burning of the flag, okay, the U.S. flag or any other in other parts of the world, in other countries, right? Freedom of the press, okay, at the bottom of page 123, like I said, very important, and there is on page 124 a reference to the Pentagon Papers and Daniel Ellsberg, who was the whistleblower back then, right? And that was around, of course, the question of the Vietnam um, war, and right then also more recently, precisely Edward Snowden himself, right? I read this. The Edward Snowden case, page 124, is another good case in point. Snowden himself, rather than those involved in promoting the information that he shared, is the object of a criminal prosecution. Although maybe there are some developments now, check that as well, right? Then the question of obscenity, which is also very interesting, right? I mean, read about that and the way in which some freedoms are, you know, uh, curtailed. For example, there is an interesting picture figure 4.11 about the warning that you find, the label that you find on a box of cigarettes, which is mandated by the Food and Drug Administration, right? So, and other similar things. Okay, so the question is, I read this free expression, although a broad right, is subject to certain constraints to balance it against the interests of a public order. So it's like the example of the warning label on cigarettes or other similar things, or the question again, a general question interesting of obscenity that you find there. So then the Second Amendment, we cannot go, read that, and you have the Third, the Fourth Amendment, read these things. These pages, the rights of suspects, and so the Fifth Amendment, um, which is, they say, one of the longest, right, in the Bill of Rights. The Sixth Amendment, also very much about the question of criminal law, criminal prosecution, and so on. And so, in any case, the Seventh Amendment on page 138, the Eighth Amendment, which includes the question of a cruel and unusual punishment, that no cruel and unusual punishment should be inflicted on anyone, and this opens up the question of around the issue around the death penalty, whether that is cruel and unusual or not. And of course, some people will say yes, some people will say no, different arguments. You can think about that as well, right? And so it's an interesting issue. I can't go into that. But so the Ninth Amendment, the 10th, and so on, right? Then the right to privacy that I touched on already, page 143, and how this right can be perhaps overridden by a more important issue around precisely state security, the Patriot Acts, for example. So then you had the key terms. I highlighted some of them, like blue law, civil liberties, civil rights, and so on and so forth. Probable cause, right to privacy, and so on. Okay, symbolic speech, self-incrimination, and then at the end, as always, you had the questions, right? The questions that I chose from this textbook for your journals this week are 1 and 2 in the journal on Blackboard in the journal section, and here 25, 28. Okay, so read read the other questions as well. Write your answer about either these two questions, or write something about the issue about Edward Snowden, and the general issue about that, right? I mean, not only he's revealing information about the surveillance program, but also other similar moments in which there is this very important question of whether one should or should not you know do something like that, right? I mean, expose, and reveal the truth, and what are the consequences about that? What is the issue in relation to the question between freedom and security, and so on and so forth. Okay, so but the focus is precisely this week on the question of civil liberties and civil rights, although next time we'll go back to this as well, but also speaking about public opinion, voting, which is so timely right now, and so on. Okay, so see you next time. Watch both videos. Okay, please, there was a technical problem. Okay, so that's why I had to make two. Okay, see you next time, and contact me with questions. Okay, thank you, bye.